The gameplay of Spider-Man Remastered is broken up amongst 3 playable characters: Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Miles Morales. Peter is of course the main character, and you'll spend the vast majority of the game behind the mask, swinging around New York, stopping crime and drop-kicking supervillains, broken up by time spent as Peter helping his Aunt May at the Volunteer Feast Center and Dr. Octavius Labs. Meanwhile, MJ and Miles both get story-driven sections dedicated to stealthing through heavily guarded areas in order to accomplish their goals. While this split between action-adventure and stealthy exploration could be considered refreshing to some, it certainly does so at the cost of the game's consistent flow and pacing at times. In more than one circumstance, you play as MJ a few minutes in the past so that you can see how she got where she is once Peter shows up in the present, rather than simply just carrying on where you were beforehand or, having you play these sections in chronological order. This kind of break and flow can make it feel like the section was a waste of time when the player seemingly already knows how it's going to end because they saw the end when they showed up. That being said, the exploration and use of Spider-Man's unique traversal mechanics is at the heart of the gameplay, constantly bringing you to new parts of the city and discovering new things to unlock, collect, or refine. There's no shortage of content to reward players who are willing to side quest and go off of the critical path. The various resources and XP that you can collect through adventuring will acquire you new skill upgrades, new gadgets, new buffs, and even new suits entirely, each of which can alter the gameplay in different and unique ways mechanically. I want to make a quick addendum here because I realized that I missed something that stood out to me. When you try to throw someone off of a building or a balcony, a web will shoot out from them and attach it to the nearest surface that they can be webbed onto. This is pretty obviously an application of the Trip Mine gadget, which creates a problem. The problem being that this literally always happens no matter how far into the game you are or how early into the game you are, meaning that Spider-Man is now using a gadget even if you haven't unlocked it yet. Also, the game seems to struggle with where exactly to send the enemies and doesn't always pick the nearest surface, so it looks really goofy sometimes. Both of these happen for me in the very first fight of the whole game. I'm not calling it a glitch, because it is clearly designed to work this way, and I'm not putting it in the mechanics section because, despite the gadget becoming part of the player's mechanics to use, this is a situational design choice that happens passively, and the game always does it for you. It's not a player input. It's just kind of weird, sloppy game design meant to justify Peter never killing anyone because he's the hero, which, I get it, but still clunky though. The world of Spider-Man is broken into 3 different types of levels for the most part. The overworld, inside of major buildings, and small portions of the overworld that are tailored for a particular story beat. The overworld is a detailed recreation of Manhattan, New York, but with changes both from the Spider-Man comics and new additions from the MCU, like Avengers Tower. This is where you'll spend most of the time in the game, and the map is full to bursting with crimes to solve, places to photograph, and things to collect. The second is whenever you enter a building for the sake of a mission, most notably the Feast Center and Octavius Industries, although there are others throughout the game. Despite the fact that every time you enter one of these, you will end up in some form of cutscene and then do something necessary for the mission, there's almost always something to do if you choose, such as speaking with NPCs or playing a minigame for the sake of XP and resources. The third is dedicated to Miles and MJ as stealth sections, and while most of MJ's sections are indoors and sneaking through an enemy compound, Miles predominantly is outside in sections of the overworld that have been cordoned off for the sake of the story. Things like the city blocks around the Feast Center becoming surrounded by guards that he needs to sneak past, or getting cornered by escaped convicts at the docks. In terms of stability, Spider-Man Remastered is unfortunately not. The 2 most damning things that came up more than once are that the game froze on me on 4 separate occasions, and I had a very inconsistent problem with it losing my controller, which would inevitably force me to use mouse and keyboard to finish the section and then re-plug in my controller after the fact to have it be recognized again. And in terms of the rest... Hey narrator, it's been a minute. I need your energy. Here's a script. Okay, okay. But wait, there's more! We have anything that flies having a weird laggy comet tail effect, cars clipping through other cars, crooks clipping into the back rooms, getting soft-locked as Miles, getting soft-locked as Miles, again! But we're not done. Keep watching and you'll find enemies despawning on screen, enemies disintegrating into the pavement when you throw them attached to a car door, Spider-Man popping in and out of reality, rockets despawning in midair instead of exploding, and so much more! Did I mention this game is buggy? Spider-Man's story is surprisingly vast, covering multiple different storylines in the critical path alone, such as Doc Ock's descent into madness and villainy thanks to his degenerative nerve disorder, Mr. Negative's inception and grudge against Norman Osborn for indirectly causing the death of his family, the origin of Miles Morales becoming the next Spider-Man and the death of his father, the relationship history between Peter and MJ as well as the process of their making up and coming together again, and even a valid setup for the villains of the next game in the form of Green Goblin and Venom through the story arcs of Norman and Harry Osborn. This isn't even to mention the side quests, the two most notable of which are Black Cat and Taskmaster baiting Peter into action for their own personal ends. Even J. Jonah Jameson makes a return, still being voiced by the ever-iconic J.K. Simmons, as a retired journalist who has now transitioned into the modern digital age by becoming a podcaster, which I find personally hilarious that Peter subscribes to. His ramblings do genuinely sell him as someone who is almost blindly passionate for New York City and genuinely does care about its inhabitants, despite his wild conspiracy theories and irrational hatred of Spider-Man that ends up becoming comic relief as you swing around saving the city. Truth be told, the story covers a tremendous amount of ground to the extent that it's almost overwhelming and seems like it maybe should have been broken up. The amount of narrative packed into this game could have very easily been split into more than one, and even though it may have given the material more room to breathe, I would actually argue that it was a good judgment not to. So many games nowadays are fixated on milking the player for all that they're worth, and a lesser game could have very easily hidden half of this game's content behind paywalls, DLC, and microtransactions, but not here. It's refreshing to see a game that gives the player so much to explore, discover, and become invested in without becoming parasitic in the process. Spider-Man is a game that manages to be very mechanically complex without necessarily becoming overly difficult. The mechanics can be split into three main categories: traversal, combat, and stealth. In terms of traversal, your ability to utilize Spider-Man's skill set is so core to everything that by the end of the game it will have become second nature to you. Interestingly, many of the exact same abilities presented back in Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube are present here as well. But, unlike that game, you get almost all of the abilities immediately rather than having to unlock most of the advanced traversal over time, such as wall running and web zipping. This gives the player much more time to familiarize themselves with them in the earlier, less dangerous parts of the game so that they're mastered by the end of the game when you really need all of them to survive, especially on higher difficulties. Combat is the most mechanically dense part. The game functions like a highly optimized version of Batman Arkham or Assassin's Creed, mashing attacks while timing a dodge or a counterattack in time with an incoming attack warning. Except, also, Spider-Man happens to be the only one of these that can justify the combat system both mechanically and narratively thanks to his spider sense. The combat seems to be partly inspired by both Doom's push-forward combat philosophy and by fighting games in general, so let me explain that. The reason I bring up Doom is because Spider-Man introduces an interesting resource management cycle. Although rather than Doom and Doom Eternal's combat chess idea, it's more like combat checkers here. The player must choose how to use their focus, the bar that fills up as you fight, use your gadgets, and perform web-swinging feats. Your focus can either be used to heal the player if they're in a pinch, or the player can choose to hold on to the meter until the meter is full, at which point they gain access to a flashy instant takedown move that also recharges the use of their gadgets, meaning that the player is made to choose in combat between a safe route that's going to increase their chances for survival by increasing their health while also making the combat harder, or take the riskier, more aggressive route that doesn't afford you more health but does immediately eliminate some of the threat and give you more tools to deal with the rest of them. Regarding the fighting game inspiration, combat operates off of various chains of inputs and button combos, all of which happen to be listed in a convenient list that the player can refer back to at any time if they get confused or want to practice on something. The stealth admittedly has the least to talk about, but is still relevant. Using your spider sense, you can sense the location of nearby enemies and even mark them permanently if you get the right upgrades. There are many situations throughout the game where Spider-Man has to infiltrate an occupied area, and the more that you can sneak around undetected and take down enemies without being noticed, the easier the inevitable big showdown is going to be at the end. In terms of MJ and Miles, neither one of them have a way to fight back against enemies that hunt them, and both will be instantly killed and given a game over if they're caught, but they're also both given different means to distract enemies. Miles has created an app that can temporarily hack into any electronic and cause it to malfunction, and Peter created noisemakers for MJ to throw in order to draw the attention of guards. There's a very consistent mechanical theme to the game. You can either do the minimum and get by, or you can learn to get good with mechanics, and with proper timing, you will be rewarded for it. You can either land on a perch point and just simply jump again, or you can time the jump in order to launch yourself. You can either dodge an attack at the moment that your spider sense tingles, or you can dodge the last possible moment when it turns blue in order to web up an enemy who attacked you, and even potentially slow down time briefly to gain more ground on the rest of the group. The visuals of the game, glitches aside, look spectacular. No pun intended. One of the first things that drew my eye was a fantastic looking smoke effect, which upon closer inspection appears to actually be individual puffs of hyper-realistic smoke that are layered together to look as though they are a single plume from a distance. Does this do anything for the player? No, but I wanted to point out the attention to detail and the ingenuity of the artists involved with this game. The whole city is covered in interesting things to look at, especially all the unique graffiti and artwork on the buildings that you're swinging off of. The animation in the cutscenes is also phenomenal, although not quite to the degree of God of War, and I'll explain why in a second. The character animation and acting is excellent, and the game does a wonderful job of making these characters feel like real people with wants, goals, struggles, and feelings, and certain scenes really do a great job of selling the emotions of these characters without ever falling into the uncanny valley.
I won't let you win. This means too much to me! Not more than it means to me!
The only reason I'd say it has room for improvement and could learn from God of War is because the game wasn't made in such a way that those cutscenes can be fluid from gameplay to cutscene and back to gameplay again. There's always this cut to black transition that's kind of jarring between the gameplay and the cutscene, and whenever you transition back, the characters that are still speaking and finishing the thoughts from a cutscene inevitably do end up falling off into the uncanny valley and look unnaturally stiff. Sound design-wise, the music in the game is adaptive, which is almost always a good thing. It changes in pace and intensity based upon what you're doing. If all you're doing is perching atop a skyscraper surveying the city or just walking around, the music will be borderline ambient, but the moment that you start swinging, the orchestra swells, and honestly, it brings a lot of the same audio identity present in the MCU Avengers theme into the mix. Enemies will also use callouts, called barks, to inform the player about their status and what they've discovered. They'll comment when they find a guard knocked out or that someone has been webbed to a surface and go into a more alert state, changing their natural patrol route as they do so. In select cases, they may even refer to one another by name, which both adds to the immersion by making the enemies you're fighting seem more like real people, and makes the not incredibly intelligent enemy AI seem smarter and more clever.
What's that? Spider-Man got Kevin! Got Davey!
You've been quiet, Frank. Fall asleep on us? Frank? Oh, crap. Did someone check on him?
So I've been waiting for a game like this for a long time, because I'm one of those kids that grew up with Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube, and I've always been kind of waiting for that kind of experience again. I feel like I'm not alone there. I feel like that's a pretty common opinion for people that played that game back when it came out. And so when I saw that Insomniac Spider-Man was getting ported over to Steam, I bought it like on the spot. I actually pre-ordered it, I think. I saw gameplay from like other YouTubers and stuff back when it first came out and thought that the game looked awesome, and it is, sort of. I think the main draw of the game is the fact that this is the first game since Spider-Man 2 that really got web swinging right. It's fun. I really liked it. But after a while and the novelty kind of wears off, for me, well, also for me personally, I explored the entire map immediately, like at the very beginning, and I got all of the towers super early, and so because of the fact that I unlocked the entire map, I kind of got the sense that the map felt a little claustrophobic. Like it slowly kind of became full to bursting with more and more stuff, because I opened up the whole world from the very beginning, and so the world kind of stopped expanding and just started kind of getting filled with stuff. But I feel like after the novelty of how much fun it is to just be Spider-Man and do all the swinging and the parkour, the stuff that really needs to hold you is the combat and the story. The combat was great. Like, it's basically perfected Batman Arkham combat, but I don't know, the story The story was a little hit or miss for me. Like, the ending had me tearing up a bit. It was really good, and I loved, there were some really, really good plot beats. Like, I love the relationship between Peter, Doc Ock, and Miles. So, I'm gonna give it I'll give it a high 7 out of 10, right? So I'll go back and replay it for sure. Like, I know I'm gonna go back and play it again some point, probably soon, because there's a lot of stuff I didn't do. But it's not my favorite. But, okay, rant time, all right? Rant time. I hate MJ. I actually hate this chick. The conflict between her and Peter is just obnoxious nonsense that boils down to Peter being condemned for being an actually caring boyfriend for a girl who, you know, unlike him, can't tank multiple gunshot wounds, explosions, hits from supervillains, or a fight with an actual militarized militia group or mercenary group without dying immediately. She constantly puts herself in life-threatening danger for the sake of getting intel, which constantly makes bad decisions for the sake of the greater good, and it just always works for her. It always just works out, and the one time it doesn't, Peter's the one that messed it up. So he's the one being made to look like the villain for all of this. There's never any negative consequences. Heck, even the consequences become good things for her, because the one time she really screws up, she gives Miles his superpowers. Like, is she a hero in her own right and a fire journalist? Yeah, absolutely. But is her anger and conflict with Peter self-centered, unjustified, and negligent of the feelings of her then partner and loved ones? 100%, yes. God, I hate that. I hate her so much. But enough about what I think. Is the game actually good? Many thanks to Insomniac for reviving this part of my childhood. I really wanted this back, and I have admittedly gone back and played all the side quests already. So, despite the 7, I still highly recommend this game. Big fan. Consider subscribing, by the way, if you made it all the way end. Thank you so much. And hey, I actually managed to do the review without saying how the game makes you feel like Spider-Man. Wait, does that count? Right.